Warning: this video contains positive opinions about Splitgate 2. Viewer discretion is advised.
Yo, what's up guys? Today I'm here with you all to play Splitgate 2, and as you can see, there are absolutely no issues with the game. It runs flawlessly and there are no problems on the backend.
Oh, Splitgate 2, where do I even begin? As someone who has played a lot of Splitgate 1, the build-up and eventual release of this game might be one of the biggest emotional rollercoasters I've ever had to go through in my entire life. I went from "we're back" to "it's fucking over" to "we are so back" to "oh, we're so fucking back" to "it's so fucking over" to "we're back" and got to now, and I am just in a constant state of pain and misery whenever I see the current state of this game. So how do we even get here? Well, to do that, I think we have to talk about the good, the bad, and the controversial, to put it in nice terms. But before we begin, I do have some things to say. Firstly, this video is a review of Splitgate 2, not Splitgate Arena Reloaded. And for someone who hasn't followed Splitgate all too much for the past months, I know this can sound kinda stupid, but there are so many massive differences between those two that they deserve to be talked about separately. So if you were expecting a review of Arena Reloaded, this is not the place for it. And I am more than certain that there are going to be tons of review for that game by the time this video is uploaded. While yes, this originally was a review for Splitgate 2 that I had started working on in August, I have taken so long to actually finish this video that now Arena Reloaded is soon going to release. So please, consider this less like a review and more so an archive of my opinions on this game back in August. And also, before Arena Reloaded releases, I just felt like I needed to get my thoughts on Splitgate 2 off of my chest before I could finally move on forever. And secondly, I know this video is kinda long, so I put chapters if you want to skip from one section to another. If I can be your launch video for the next week, I would be very grateful. Anyways, enjoy! First off, what makes Splitgate 2 different from Splitgate 1? Well, I'll explain you, but first let me tell you a story. You see, a long time ago, a man called Halo and a woman called Portal fell in love together. And after they had some fun activity in bed, this is a thing that came out 9 months later. But after a couple of years in their relationship, Portal ended up getting bored of Halo because he is completely washed, and she ended up meeting a new person called TITANFALL 2. And after they had some alone time together, this is what came out 9 months later. Yeah, for Splitgate 1, the main quote of the game was Halo meets Portal, but for Splitgate 2, I definitely think that it should be Titanfall meets Portal, which, I mean, yeah, okay, you're replacing a good game for another good one. But of course, that means we aren't playing an arena shooter anymore, but a movement shooter that still retains arena shooter mechanics like the ability to pick up power weapons, and the game modes that are present feel closer to what we have in Halo. You know, team deathmatch, domination. Splitball is basically just free flag capture the flag. You know, all stuff that you'd expect to see in Halo. Get out of the screen! But since we got a genre change, what changes were made to your core moveset? Well, not a lot actually. The portals are pretty much doing most of the heavy lifting anyways. Personally, I always considered the original Splitgate to be a movement shooter due to how fast games could go sometimes. I mean, if you learn how to triple portal and where portals are placed on a map, you can move around these maps in basically a couple of seconds. But of course, some extra additions were made to make moving around a lot more fun. In particular, the addition of a slide, which is one of the best things added to the game. One of my biggest complaints with Splitgate 1 was a lack of tools to preserve your momentum. It doesn't matter if you are going super fast. The millisecond you touch the ground, you lose all your speed. Which, by the way, if you come to a complete stop in such a small amount of time, wouldn't that snap your legs in half or something? Technically, you kept your momentum as long as you didn't touch the ground, so you could spam the jetpack and slightly hover over the ground to keep your speed for just a little longer. But when you ran out of fuel, you went straight back to depression. And thankfully, the addition of the slide does a great job to fix this issue. And I'm honestly kinda shocked at how much a small addition like this to your moveset can shake up the gameplay by so much. But it isn't the biggest addition. No, the real big one is factions. I can guarantee you saying that word probably gave someone goosebumps. We got 3 of them, and each one can choose between 5 primary weapons, 3 secondaries, 3 equipment, and 1 ability. While they all have the same stats and the way that you approach the game is pretty identical between each of them, their equipment and abilities give them more unique and interesting ways to approach engagements, which I think is a pretty good example of a class-based shooter where picking a class isn't super important since it doesn't force you into a specific playstyle, but still adds enough of a difference between each of the classes that you can still think a little bit about which one you prefer. While Eros has weapons that are somewhat in the middle and lacks a lot in the ability to support his team, they are generally capable of surviving for much longer since they have more of an edge in 1v1s. Whether that would be with equipment like the shock disc that stuns the enemy, and their main ability that provides them with faster movement and reload speed, making it easier to get kills. Equipment like the healing steam, allowing them to stay alive for longer, or even the Porta portal, allowing them to spawn a portal out of thin air to either escape a tricky situation or even appear behind the enemy's back. Meridian is the support class, and they do support things. They can create a dome that speeds up you and your teammates and slows down your opponents when inside, a healing bubble that does exactly what the name implies, a recon radar that shows your opponents on the map, and their ability shows nearby opponents to your entire team, which is very helpful to tell when they are preparing a push. And finally, Sobrask, adding weapons with the best DPS in the game, sticky grenades to deal a large amount of damage, proximity mines that stun enemies, smoke grenades to hide in, and being able to spawn a wall as their ability. Sobrask is best for objective-based game modes, and the simplicity of their abilities also makes them a pretty good option for new players or those that are not as familiar with portaling. And like, I already know what some people might be thinking. The game has separate classes. Only some of them can use specific weapons. It's a hero shooter. It's a hero shooter. And like, no. Now I won't exactly say that I'm shocked that some people had this reaction, considering that the original audience for Splitgate 1 was classic Halo fans, and as we all know, classic Halo fans are deathly terrified of change, so I can't say I'm surprised. But to me, for a game to be considered a hero shooter, it needs to meet one of 2 conditions. It either needs to A, have very different stats and playstyles between each characters, and or B, the characters need to have very distinct personalities to them. So for a game like Overwatch, obviously it fits those 2 categories. Same with a game like Team Fortress 2, or even Marvel Rivals. But Splitgate 2 does not fit in any of those categories. Sure, you might play as completely separate characters, but they are more skins than anything. They never speak in-game and are basically completely soulless husks who have almost no differentiation in personality other than, oh, this one is cool and this one is also cool, but slightly edgy. Oh my god, how original! And as for the gameplay, you really shouldn't have to look at footage for more than 5 seconds to realize that this is not a game with massive differences in character stats and playstyles, but a game with only slight differentiation between each of the classes. Sure, it might share some similarities with some hero shooters, like only being able to use specific equipment and weapons with a specific class. But then at that point I could also just say that Battlefield 6 is a hero shooter because you can only use specific equipment with specific classes. But nobody in their right mind would make that argument because they know that the nearest Battlefield fan would pull up just to beat their ass. Basically, if you're going on the Steam page of a game and look at the tags that were given by players, and the so-called hero shooter game does not have the hero shooter tag as the first thing that pops up, that probably means it's not a hero shooter. And don't get it twisted. I'm not annoyed by you if you dislike the factions because you think they stray too far from the core Splitgate 1, or that they complicate the game too much. No, as a matter of fact, I respect you for having critical thinking abilities. No, I'm more so annoyed at the people who don't like factions, but they don't want to put any effort into thinking about why they don't like factions and just label it as a hero shooter when it is objectively wrong! But even as one of the biggest Splitgate 2 diehards on the planet, I can admit that sometimes having to face some of those faction abilities can be quite frustrating and that they could definitely use some work. Or that they could even remove the factions entirely and remove all restrictions on guns and equipment. I mean, jeez, if only there was a game that was just like this. Still, even with factions, I still found myself to have quite a lot of fun with Splitgate 2. The movement is miles better than the first game, and the gunplay, which I didn't touch on, is also really damn fun. Though I think a lot of the enjoyment I get from the gunplay comes from how great sound design is, in particular the sound effects for when you get a kill. Putting a bunch of bullets in your opponent's body and having them silently fall on the ground just isn't satisfying. That's the reason why so many modern games always have a sound cue for when you get a kill, and the one that Splitgate 2 has is just fucking delicious. So yeah, so far this is looking like an amazing sequel to Splitgate 1. They got right most of the stuff that's important, so let's see what's next. Okay, so technically they did not fuck up the way that portals work. I've seen a lot of people say that portals are slower to deploy than in Splitgate 1, and from the limited amount of testing I've done, it seems to be similar. Maybe it just feels like it's slower because the opening animation is longer and more complex, but in terms of when the portal is active, it's pretty much the same as before. Although there have been other changes made to the portals, such as the ability to place your own portal over a friendly one, which is a godsend! You do not understand how many times I wanted to place a portal to get a good angle on an enemy. But I just couldn't because one of my teammates just refused to remove that fucking portal! This improves the game flow by so much, and it's kinda crazy how small changes like this makes the game so much better. However, they also gave you the ability to remove enemy portals by just placing one over it. And I'm not as much of a fan for this change. One of the best elements of portals is that they resolve what I like to call defender's advantage, where it is impossible to take back an objective from a team that is well coordinated. Portals helped mitigate that issue, since with them, you could create new angles to take the enemy team by surprise. Technically, the enemy could also close portals in Splitgate 1, however they needed to use EMP grenades, which they only had 2 of. So after using those, they'd actually be forced to, play the game. Meanwhile, in Splitgate 2, there's no limit to how many times you can turn off portals. And technically, there's a short period where you can't shut it down after it was placed to try and mitigate this issue, but it doesn't help. But I don't even think this would be that hard of an issue to fix. Just simply bringing back the EMP grenades from Splitgate 1 would pretty much be a perfect solution. Once again, I just wish that there was a game that would have this type of grenade back. So the way that the portal works by themselves is pretty identical to what we had before. Hell, in some ways, I think it's better. But in terms of the maps you use the portals on... Oh boy, I'm gonna have to spend a while to explain this. Alright, let me break this down in the easiest way possible. A good chunk of Splitgate 1 maps usually had a lot of verticality, and some of them, like Abyss, also had asymmetrical designs, which made thinking with portals pretty interesting, since you were constantly jumping around from one level to another, and you could also gain a ton of speed by falling down super high and transferring your momentum. By comparison, Splitgate 2 maps are more like Call of Duty. They usually feature 3 lanes that can intertwine at certain points. But using lanes is something that can be seen in pretty much every game these days. Even Splitgate 1 had some. No, the real big change is that they removed a lot of the verticality on these maps. So usually you will only see 2 layers at the most. And if this was a more traditional first-person shooter, or heck, even if you're playing no portals, I think these maps are actually pretty well designed. But once again, we are thinking with portals, and these maps really aren't as good. I personally don't think these maps are nearly as bad as some people made them out to be. Heck, I actually think they're pretty decent. But playing with portals will never be as fun, since for movement, you're basically limited to triple portaling. And for combat, you're also basically limited to flanking behind your enemy to take them by surprise, which isn't as interesting as what we had before. The worst part is that, like factions, this isn't even something just a bunch of angry gamers were complaining about on launch day. Splitgate 2 die-hard fans like myself were already complaining about this issue like a year ago. And when people are yelling in your ears about the same issue for almost a year, and the only thing that you did was just slap a band-aid on the existing maps during one of the playtests and nothing else, that means there is something very wrong going on. It's honestly a damn shame, because there are glimpses where it feels like there actually is a bit of verticality on these maps, especially on Bypass, which, in my opinion, is fantastic. No, I won't say that again! It's a pretty well designed map if you ask me. It's big and open enough to allow players to slide around the map super fast and do some cool triple portaling, but still closed in enough so that you can have interesting gunfights, and also not feel like you're getting shot out of nowhere constantly.
You'll be back in the action soon.
I think it's pretty good, and 1047 should definitely add more maps that have this kind of verticality in the future. Or even revamp some of the older maps to have more portal placements. I can't stress this enough. I am just so desperate for a game that could do what I'm talking about right now. Ahem! Don't get me wrong, I think it's also fine to have smaller more closed-in maps that are more finely tuned for a competitive experience.
Two zones.
But Splitgate is always at its most fun when you are playing on big open maps. And stuff like Bypass makes me realize just how great Splitgate 2's core mechanics are. It's just that the maps you play them on are kinda boring. This game really should have been an easy slam dunk. And there's a lot to like about it. I like the core gameplay, I like a majority of the maps. I think the game looks really good. I think the microtransactions are fine. And the developers are always listening to criticism, making surveys, looking at reviews, reading Reddit posts to try and make the game as good as they possibly can. There is a very good base for a game that can last for years to come. But the launch of the game absolutely ruined it! Yeah, it's time to talk about the elephant in the room. This game has a lot of problems and it's gonna take me a while to talk about all of them. So take a seat and hear me ramble. And also, just know that I have a box of tissues right next to me because I'll probably start crying halfway through. So first off, the launch of the game was an absolute disaster. And the problems already started during the beta, which had some massive technical problems on the back end. The store did not work, and you'd think that for a free-to-play game, this is the one thing they had to make sure it would function correctly. Progression was also completely broken, and it was basically impossible to level up your battle pass, factions, or weapons. And of course, the game had server issues. Fucking again! Look, I know that the cause for the server issues was different, and obviously, you can't anticipate every single little problems when releasing a product to the masses. But I don't know, man, when you consider the fact that the server issues were partially the reason why the first game died, you'd think that the CEO would be so traumatized from that experience that he would spend millions on the best netcode imaginable so something like this never occurs. However, the game was really fun. And the devs were very open about the issues with the game and made sure to fix them as fast as they could, while also rewarding the players who were patient enough and put up with their garbage. Plus, once again, it was a beta, so a lot of this stuff could be forgiven. So while the reviews were originally pretty bad, they eventually managed to climb their way back to mostly positive. And then Summer Game Fest happened and I just lost all hope. The garbage marketing is something that's pretty well documented at this point, and even if you weren't interested in the game, you probably heard about it. So I won't waste too much time going over it, but I'll still mention some of the worst things that came out of it, such as hyping up a big announcement for 4 days only for it to be a game mode that everyone is tired of, dunking on Call of Duty for doing the same thing every year and being way too predictable, only for them to hire someone who worked on the microtransactions of those games and put the same greedy ass prices on some products. Some, very questionable tweets, and of course the fucking hat. But even if we lived in a perfect world and the announcement of this game was smooth sailing, I don't think it would have made a difference because there are some bigger problems on the horizon. First off, a couple of the issues from beta managed to creep back into the final game. Mainly progression was still completely broken, which made leveling up anything incredibly tedious, and to fix that problem it took them almost 2 months, oh my god. Secondly, the decision to implement factions instead of more traditional arena shooter mechanics finally came back to bite them in the ass. Look, I'm okay with 1047 attempting new things, and as long as it's good, personally, I'll play it. But their target audience was Halo fans. These people don't even like it when there's a sprint button. What did they think was going to happen? But you know, it's not too bad. There are still people that enjoy this new style of gameplay, as long as there is a good amount of content in the game and loads of quality of life features. Then it should all be fine, right?
Firecracker. Clock is ticking to defuse it.
What the hell is this 1047? Only 19 maps in Splitgate 2, of which 5 are used in Onslaught, a mode that isn't even in the normal rotation anymore, so we can cut those out. So that only leaves us with 14 maps, whereas Splitgate 1 had 37! Obviously, I don't expect Splitgate 2 to have nearly as many maps at launch as a game that got supported for almost 6 years, since that game was still getting new user-generated maps added to playlists right before Splitgate 2 launched. But when you have such a huge amount of beloved maps that feature a ton of verticality and the elements that people loved about the first game, and you only bring back 2 of them? Fucking 2? And those 2 maps already feature pretty similar design to the other maps in the game? I'm sorry, but this is just unacceptable. I think what's even more frustrating than the lack of content is the lack of features. At launch, the game was missing all of these features. This is all stuff that was either already in Splitgate 1 or was kind of expected to be in Splitgate 2, since it's supposed to be an improvement over the original. And almost 5 months after launch, we have that's it. That's all they added. Combine those 2 factors with the fact that the game was quite unpolished and it just felt unfinished. It almost feels like this game was supposed to come out in October, but they instead decided to push it out in June so that they could have a huge reveal at Summer Game Fest and get as many people on board. And I know for a fact that's what they're thinking, because that's basically what they told us. But like, even if they tried to aim for a June release, there are definitely ways they could have saved some resources. So, what was that mode in question that they hyped up for Summer Game Fest? A Battle Royale. Okay, look, this is coming from someone that actually enjoyed Splitgate 2's BR. I think that it was actually pretty well designed and that it would fit Splitgate 2 quite well. So I mean this in the most respectful way possible. 1047. What the fuck is wrong with you? Not only is putting your BR mode, a genre that everybody is sick of, as the main announcement at the biggest gaming event of the year a terrible idea, but in the state the game was in, this was just a gigantic waste of resources. Sure, the maps for BR were already made for Onslaught, and you already have all the weapons needed for regular arena play, but making a BR isn't as easy as just setting up some custom server settings. There are loads of extra elements needed for a BR. You still gotta make the glue to make everything stick together. And all that time and money spent making the glue could have been spent making something more important, like, oh, I don't know, an option to pick the modes and maps? Bro, how are we evolving backwards? I've said it before and I'll say it again. This doesn't feel like a complete package. This feels like a game that needed to remain in beta for just a little bit longer. Almost everyone in the community agrees with this. Heck, even the developers agree with this. Ian Prowlix, I hope I pronounced that right, CEO of 1047, admits that they were too ambitious and that in retrospect, they think it would have been better only to have 1 or 2 modes that were fully complete, rather than having a bunch of modes that are like only 80% complete. That's also why they decided to put the game back in beta. What? I mean, yeah, there's technically nothing that stops you from taking a product back to development to try and polish it up a bit. But at the same time, it felt like they realized they absolutely fucked up and they were trying to dip. And that's everything I had to say. If you are hearing this, thank you so much. These longer videos are always super risky for me to make, since people's attention span has gotten so bad nowadays. So the fact that you've listened to me ramble about a dead game for so long just makes me really happy. Now, as for what the future holds for Splitgate and how I feel about Arena Reloaded, well, I feel mostly conflicted. I mean, Arena Reloaded honestly looks amazing. Removing factions, improving progression, reducing the price of microtransactions, among so many other things. And it truly feels like we are going back to the roots of Splitgate 1 and that this should have been Splitgate 2 at its launch. But that's also my problem. This should have been what Splitgate 2 was at launch, but it wasn't. Instead, we had a game that was fun, yes, but that also alienated old fans by straying too far from Splitgate 1, alongside potential new fans by being an unpolished game with barely any content or features. 1047 has lost so much goodwill with the launch of Splitgate 2, and even if Arena Reloaded is near perfect, it feels like that still wouldn't make a difference, which is just so depressing. Because I love Splitgate 1 and 2, and I want to be excited for Arena Reloaded, but I feel like if I let myself get too excited, then it would absolutely break my heart if this game ends up being a failure again. Especially when they were capable of admitting the flaws with the game, something that really no other game studio does these days, and pulled the game back into beta so that they could rebuild the core with the community. But there's only so much that I can predict at the moment. Arena Reloaded launches tomorrow at the time that this video will be uploaded, and once that's out, we will have all the answers. So now, all we must do is wait. Yeah, that's all I had for this one. Okay, bye!